Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, however you happen to be joining us, and wherever you happen to be, uh, whatever the place is you're joining us from. Welcome to the Grief as a Language podcast. I am John Wright, your host, and I feel it a singular honor to be your tour guide as we sort of walk with others and talk around, walk through, jump over, go under grief topics, grief related topics, and sort of work some of these issues out in our own worlds. I've been rereading recently some of the Lyman Beecher lectures. It's a lecture series that's held every year at, I think it's Yale Divinity School. And I'm reading only the old ones. And one of the lecturers I really like, met him years ago. His name is John Claypool. John and his wife had a daughter named Laura Lou, who was 10 years old, and she died of leukemia. And he did a series of lectures dealing with what it was like being a public religious person and having dealt with this real tragedy, his language, in his life. And he pulled up, in one of his lectures, he took a story. Those of you who have Christian church backgrounds and Bible backgrounds will know. He took a story of a man who was, remember all the details, but a man who was out living in a cemetery, and he was hurting himself and doing all kinds of things. And he was just having a difficult time and a difficult life. And John Claypool said, I remember this, I remembered it, but then read it again, I think last night or night before. John Claypool said that maybe um, we can learn most about this man in the cemetery by paying attention to where he lives. He said perhaps this man had taken a relative to the cemetery and left them there, and had never been able to get beyond his own grief. I don't know if that's true or not. It comes out of the imagination of John Claypool, but that is really why and how this podcast was born out of a need on the part of the host to understand grief better, my own and the grief of others. And to do so, I've taken it upon myself to invite some of the people I like listening to most in other settings to talk with me about this particular topic. And today, we are all lucky to have, I'll call her affectionately Reverend Amy. Amy is the parish minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto, better known as UUCPA. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
I'm so glad
It's great.
you could join us. Go ahead.
No, it's just great to have this conversation with you. We've had a lot of deep conversations in our friendship, and it's just really good to talk about something really meaningful to
Uh,
both of us and
we
to your
have
listeners.
a lot of conversations. Amy's been to our home, and I've been to theirs, and it is we have daughters. Her daughter's older than ours, but we have a lot of things in common. I was on the staff for I want to say 3 years
2 3 years, yeah.
at UUCPA, and so I feel I know Amy, but something tells me I'm going to learn something I didn't know about her today as we talk
Hope so.
about this topic. Amy, I have invited you here in our pre um, recording session. We talked a little bit about the ways in which people can show up publicly, and you can show up as your personal self, your professional self, or several other selves, I'm sure. But when I extended the invitation to you, I did so hoping you would bring all of who you are into the room. And so, whatever we're talking about and whenever we're talking about it, I hope you'll feel free to go where you want to go. and not so
Thank you.
much where the question might have been leading, so that we can talk about grief. I did a lot of ceremonies as a pastor in Dallas, and I watched you uh, as you did a lot as well at UUCPA. I wanted just to begin by asking you what intentional word here, what it feels like to be in the room um, when someone is experiencing pain, separation, whatever the language is around grief, a partner who has lost a partner, or a parent who's lost a child, or any of those other possibilities. What does it feel like to you to be in those rooms?
It's an interesting mix of feeling helpless and feeling like I'm right there being exactly where I need to be, doing the most useful thing I can be doing in my life at that moment. And I think my journey in, developing as a minister is probably familiar to a lot of people in helping professions. That I went into it, in part to help people. I mean, there's a lot to being a minister, but I wanted to be with people, including in very hard times, and help them and support them. And also I went in, I was much younger then, with much more of an attitude of a need to fix bad situations for
Yeah.
people, and a fantasy that I could do such a thing. In my clinical pastoral education room, this is the training that certainly all Unitarian Universalist ministers, and I know a lot of other clergy in training have to do, where you work in a clinical setting, like a hospital usually,
Right.
sometimes a prison or a hospice, and you learn to be pastoral with families and people who are ill and so on,
Yeah.
dying. We had up on a wall the Superman T-shirt. Somebody brought it in because we kept talking about, who do you think you are, Superman? So I had to learn how to not be Superman, and to kind of let go of all my desire for control, my own anxiety about, oh my God, this person's suffering is so terrible. I have to make it go away, which of course is absurd. You can't really make. Oh, poof! Now you're not sad anymore that your spouse died. I mean, it's ludicrous on the face
Absurd,
of
but
it. But
absurd, but
but
admirable.
that's my own desire to help, and what I learned through clinical pastoral education, and way too many missteps that I would hate to have to recount, and the wise teaching of the people in my congregations over the years is, people really, really do need us to just sit there and be there with them, just to truly be there with them, and not be thinking, oh, what can I say to fix this, or not, just to really listen. And it feels like a gift over and over again, that is what people want and need. They don't come into that office or into the sanctuary for a memorial service expecting all their pain to dissipate.
Yeah.
They just need, they know that's not possible. That time and friendship and healing will make that easier, but that what any one person can do is just be part of that presence.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's always a little part of me that's like, what do I do? And usually a wiser part of me saying, Amy, just be here, just listen. That's all the person needs. That's all you can do, all you need to do. And a very big part of my experience as a pastor is just intense gratitude to be a part of that, to be able to do anything to help. I know you said in an earlier show yourself that you miss doing funerals.
Yeah.
And I confessed once to my congregation that I really love to do funerals. I won't say enjoy, but I love it. And not that they understood well that it feels good to be able to do one small thing that can help people in some of the worst moments of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I
That's how
remember.
most of us feel when a friend is suffering or something.
Yeah.
I wish I could help. And I have one thing I can do to help. They come and say, help me plan this service and help put it on for me. And I'm glad to be able to help.
Absolutely. I remember when you're telling that your saying of those words reminds me of how I would feel when I was on my way to meet a family at the funeral home or at their home following something having gone wrong, or someone having passed away. And I remember driving on, those who living in Dallas area, you'll know Central Expressway, the busiest, it's like the Highway 80, Amy, of the Dallas area. Just extremely crowded. But I caught myself on my way, I can't remember where we were meeting, but on my way to the meeting, trying to script what I was going to say. So when I first walk in, I'll say this. And then if they say this, I'll say this. And I didn't want to be
I
without
get it.
words. I thought my job was to speak meaning into these moments for them, rather than to find a chair in a corner somewhere and allow them to find meaning if there was any there. For them on their own. So I remember that, and I think that, I mean, beyond just the ego involved in that, if we can push that aside for a minute, I just like you wanted to help, and I think that was the impetus for being a part of public facing ministry anyway, so to try to help. So I think it's admirable to want to help. I'm not sure it's admirable to be trying to script what you're going to say on the way to a meeting.
Well, I think
But
I think it's also that's part of wanting to help, and it's part of wanting not wanting to say the wrong thing, and it's also fear. For me, it's fear. I mean, it's scary, and my wife will say to me sometimes, "Oh wow, how do you pick up the phone and call somebody when you've just heard that the worst has happened in their life?" And it's not that. I mean, I have to take a few deep breaths,
yeah,
um, but you know, like other things, it gets to be just part of, okay, this is just what I do.
yeah,
But I think part of that fear is like the control comes in. Well, if I know what to say, then I won't be so afraid.
yeah,
But there's another way to tackle the fear, which is I'm just going to be there and trust that if I'm really present with them, if I'm really responding, whatever wisdom I may have to offer will come up. If nothing comes up, it's because there was nothing wise to say. There's just the breathing and being with people
yeah,
um, who often have amazing wisdom for me for how to get through things like that, but also just they just need to know they're not alone.
yeah.
And in a way, grief, I mean, grief is very lonely no matter what, you know, even
Feels like it is.
two people side by side, you know, suffering the same loss are still they're still each in their own, you know, little world of hurt. And we all know that.
Yeah.
We just
Have you talked at
want
all
to hold
with
hands.
your daughter, Indigo? Have you
Yeah.
do you talk with Indigo about, I remember some time ago when your wife's um father, I believe,
Yeah.
a member of her family passed away. How does the parent in you find words to wrap around that kind of experience for Indigo? What was she, 15 at the time, maybe 16?
Yeah, that's about right. She would have been 15 then. She's 17 now. So that's very different than when she
Hmm,
was much younger.
right.
Um, and, you know, and we've had other losses. And it looks very different when you're talking to a 4 or 5 year old, of course. But yeah, so again, I mean, I think also with my daughter, she schools me if I don't know it myself, that it's not, oh, wise mother is going to say the right things here. I'm just trying to make a space for us to talk, you know. So I asked her, "How are you doing with Papa's?" We were all there, you know, we were all there with his for his passing and for his memorial service, and she spoke and so on. So I had a lot of opportunities to know what was going on for her, but then just checking in with her, "How's it
Mhm.
going for you?" And just saying how I felt myself, just saying, you know, I really miss him today. I was close to my father-in-law, and he was really a wonderful man, and just to invite that on her part. And she has her own way of dealing with grief, you know, my grief is different from her grief is different from my wife's grief, of course. And so I don't think I had any magic words. I would just ask her how it was going and try to be really accepting of whatever that looked like for her.
Right.
Which doesn't look exactly like it looks for me.
Sure.
And to let her know that these things change, that she might feel very different at a different time, and that's how grief is. It just pops up at odd times and expresses itself in ways you didn't expect. But again, I think probably the best way that I find to convey to my daughter that she can tell me any of those things. Whether it's, I really miss somebody or so-and-so, or I haven't thought about so-and-so in months, what's the matter with me, you know, is not to say, oh, well, I'm here for anything, but just to be here, you know, when she talks to me, to bite my tongue and listen and ask her more questions. And grief is it's such a profound experience. But boy, I mean, you ask about, I mean, the control, the desire to script, the desire to help really kicks in with my kid, you know, because I want everything to be just perfect for her. And it's, you know, of course it's not. I'm there with her when her grandfather is dying and she's crying. And
Yeah. Does she ask, did Indigo ask you questions about what happens after this, or where's grandpa going? Or she was beyond that age, perhaps?
when she was younger, she did. I think now she has her own opinion. Certainly she has a pretty firm idea of that. And I think she knew what he thought about it too, for what that's worth. But when she was younger, I think it, you know, here's my, you know, religious professional voice kicking in. I think it's really common for kids to start asking those questions around 4 or 5, and sometimes people are spooked by them.
Yeah.
My kid is just asking me about what happens when we die and when am I going to die, and you know, they're worried about that and everything and what's going on here. And sometimes, I mean, we had a cat of ours had died just a little bit around that time, so that gave an opportunity for her to ask about it. But I think it's really typical around that time anyway. It's just they're starting to realize, like, oh, this is that thing that happens to the dead squirrel I saw on the road, and that you told me happened to grandma before I was born, and all those things that's going to happen to the people I love. And
Yeah.
so she asked about it then, and even then I asked her about what she thought too. I don't remember what she said. Well, anyway, this is I'm on the podcast, not her. You'll have to ask her.
That's all
But
right.
but yeah, I mean, again, I think well, I have a lot of humility on that question. Not on everything, but on that question, which is, I mean, I really don't think we know.
Yeah.
And some people are very confident, and if they are sure they're going to meet their dear parent in heaven or whatever, bless them. That's great. And some people say people have come and spoken to them,
Yeah.
and they are lucky, lucky people. I hope that happens to me. And some people are just as certain that, you know, you rot underground and nothing else is seen of you.
Yeah.
I have my theories, but I'm pretty agnostic on the point because, you know,
Mhm.
I've never died before. So, and
Yeah.
I have not had anybody that I loved come and say anything reassuring after they died, but
I've heard lots of people tell you, I don't know if you saw the episode
many.
with Aura
Yeah.
Gibson recently. She talked
Yeah.
about the husband coming like 2 days later or something and hugging her and saying he loved her.
I've known so many people to have that experience
Yeah.
that, and people I know. So I don't think they're crazy. I don't think they're fooling themselves. I don't think they're religiously brainwashed. I think they're having a powerful and comforting experience. And that's such a blessing.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit, Amy, about your professional life in terms of your tell us a story or two about some folks you have worked with and just what that was like for you and what you how you perceived it to be for them. You got the word, you made the call. What is
Yeah.
the process, the marching along the way, knowing that the service is 2 weeks out and so on? What does that look like
Right.
for you? What do you do with your time And when do you allow what is going to happen relative to this person's passing to intrude on your everyday? You have a schedule, you've got stuff to do. And this is coming,
Yeah.
it's not slowing down, it's coming fast.
And I do not, this is a real issue for me. This is an ongoing challenge for me, emotionally, spiritually. I don't want to say a problem, because of course, just dealing with my own sorrow is an issue. Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of memorial services for people I did not know before. People just come looking for a pastor, and then there's people I know very, very well who have died, and working on their memorial. And then there's a vast range of people in between. You know, people in the church say, I know the mourners, but I don't know the person who has died. And so those things are all different. In terms of being there as the pastor, being with the people who are mourning, I hope it's the same. The job is the same, you know, as I said, show up, be there, meet with them, assure them we've got it, you know, ask them the questions I need to ask them to put together whatever is meaningful for them.
Yeah.
But the personal piece varies greatly. And I've now been at this, I've been at this church for 21 years. I'm grieving people who I have known for 20 years. And people, I mean, this has always been true. It can happen in your first year as a pastor, helping a family or loved ones grieve the death of somebody I loved, and I'm grieving myself.
Yeah.
And obviously I try to always put that to the back burner, you know.
Sure.
Their issues first, and it's much more serious, you know.
Yeah.
The loss of a parishioner is nothing like the loss of a parent or a spouse or so on. But also, but there's room, as I know these people, to let them know I'm sad too. You know, I loved thus and such about this person, and I miss them. And to let them know that too, to just say, I was really thinking about your late husband today and what he would have said about this.
Right.
So anyway, you asked me very specifically, like, what do I do in those weeks coming up? I mean, you know, just call immediately, try to follow up, let them know, okay, here's what we do. I'll meet with them and talk through stuff. And then I just check in with them now and then. I mean, we have a whole pastoral network, and I try to make sure other people are checking in on them too. Sure. I figure it's probably much more meaningful to just know you're held by a whole community and you have your friends here who are checking in on you instead of the person who's paid to do it. But I just call and say, how you doing, or drop them a line, or look out for them when they come to church, and give them a hug and see how they're doing.
Yeah.
But the process of dealing with my own grief is an interesting one, because I have to, either I have to, or I'm taking the excuse to push it down, push it aside for a while. And I started going to a spiritual director many years ago, so whom I still see. Specifically, we talk about a lot of things, but what brought me to her was specifically, I need help dealing with my grief about the people in the congregation when they die, which of course touches on my own losses.
Sure.
And it comes and goes, but she's really helped me to find the practices that will help me to deal with it.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you, sorry if I'm stopping you there, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what do you see as complicating grief for you? What complicates it? What gets in the way? What prevents movement if you get stuck? What complicates grief for you?
Well, for me personally, or you mean what I observe?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there's an expression like complex or complicated grief, and you know, I know what that can be. It doesn't really kick in with my members of my congregation, but absolutely does with personal losses, like the greatest, the death of the person closest to me, probably in my life was the death of my ex-husband, and he was ex at that point. He'd been divorced for a few years at that point. So both the fact that we were still roiled by divorce, we had not, I hoped that we would get back to the point of being, we were cordial, but that I hope we would maybe one day become friends and certainly be in touch with each other, not just for little businessy things, the way we were. And also it was, that made it a little complicated. It couldn't just be pure sorrow. It was somebody I was really angry at and disappointed in and hurt by and felt that I had hurt. That's a detritus of divorce. And then also he killed himself.
Suicide.
And thank you. And while that was something I had feared for a very long time, he'd struggled with being suicidal all his adult life, as far as I know. So in that sense, it wasn't out of the blue. It was a terrible shock. And what I never knew until that moment was how angry a person can be about suicide. I mean, from the outside, I thought, well, that person was suffering and so on. And I understood all that. And I was glad he wasn't suffering. And I would not fault somebody who was trying to release themselves from suffering in all sorts of situations. And yet I was furious. I was just furious. How could you do this? How could you do this to your mother? How could you do this to the people who love you, your siblings? And how could you do this to me, even though I didn't have any claim on him anymore? I just recognize now that that's just part of it. But anyway, so that's sort of the technical term for like complex grief, is when other things come in that keep it from just being, I am terribly sad, I miss this person, I am depressed. What we expect from grief, right? Is it that I've been estranged from my mother for 40 years and now she dies. Now how do I feel? Well, I feel a mix, right? It's not me, just as an example. But for me, there's also you asked what complicates it for me, and I think it's just my own. What complicates every grief, gets in the way of my just moving through it, is deferring it, trying to push it away, trying to not feel those feelings. I don't have time for those feelings right now, or I don't have room for them, or I don't know what will happen if I let go and start crying of this person, if I'll ever stop. And I mean, of course that doesn't work. I mean, the best thing to do is just try to feel it when you can feel it. And sure, maybe not burst out crying at the memorial service that I'm officiating, but to say afterwards, then I will go home and I will feel my feelings and I will cry. I will journal about this. I will make art about this. These are some of the things I do, and I won't just say, well, I'm doing okay, and move on.
Right.
And I'd say this is what I'm saying to myself, because I have not learned this lesson, but, and every grief can bring up other griefs.
Yes.
So there's always an opportunity to realize I haven't really mourned for so-and-so.
Yeah.
So I think I just get in my own way, really, my own fears of what will happen if I give way to my grief. And,
Yeah. I was thinking, I can't remember who the person was who told the story. It was a thing about complicating. I'm trying to pull together this sort of psychoanalytic understanding of grief and what complicates it. But this person told a story. It was a woman, name's not coming to me, but she's told a story of a little boy, 4-year-old boy who'd gotten a puppy, and the puppy. He loved the puppy, and he was outside playing with the puppy and doing all sorts of things. He went in the house to get some water. And as he went in the house, he didn't notice that the puppy was trying to follow him. And the screen door closes on the puppy's neck. And so he comes out and he heard a little animal is hurt noise, and went back out and saw the puppy go limp on the ground. And he's trying to, in his 4-year-old way, trying to revive the puppy. Puppy won't be revived. And so someone else comes out, a grown-up comes out, and they try and he can't. And so the puppy dies, and he hears the word death associated with something he loves for the first time. And just psychologically, I'm wondering when I think about complications around grief, I'm wondering if how we have, just interested in your thoughts about this, how we are introduced to the topic uh, might influence how we are as adults processing when the topic is brought up again, either by
Yeah.
behavior, someone dies, or someone mentions that someone has died. She told the story and said the little boy perhaps uh, what, how did she put it? Perhaps the little boy would see death as something that takes away something that I was rightfully entitled to. And so
Mm.
you go through life sort of shaking your fists in the face of death.
Right.
How dare you take what is mine? So that's where the question comes from. And I'm just sort of wondering about
Yeah.
your thoughts about that. Do you think uh,
That is interesting.
how Madison, my daughter at 10 now, she's known a few people who've died, and we try to do, as you all have tried to do, to ask the right questions and let her live it. But I'm just wondering, a little boy like that who has that experience, 4 might be a little early. I'm not sure if I'm to hold on to that, but I'm wondering if there's something to that, how people have been introduced to this kind of sorrow, how it was first introduced, and if that helps or hurts when they face sorrow as adults.
I mean, that's a huge, fascinating question, and I hope somebody is studying it in a proper way. I'm just theorizing, you
Too.
know.
Me
I mean,
too.
I do think people are amazingly resilient, um, amazingly wise. We have not only all the people we know, but the entire, literature of humanity, of all the religions and books and songs and everything that have dealt with this. I find that comforting and helpful to read the works of, Seneca or somebody, people who are dealing with death thousands of years ago and think, oh yeah, it's the same,
Yeah.
and just sometimes they have very wise words, and sometimes it's just somehow very reassuring to me to realize people have always been dealing with this.
Yeah.
So all that is to say that I don't think there's anything a 4-year-old could feel that is so foreign or strange to the person who's comforting him, um, that he should feel, that there's anything wrong with him or the world. I mean, this is a very bad thing to find out about the world, is that sweet little puppies die.
Yeah.
But we all have to come into that understanding, and to just know you are not alone and everything you feel is legitimate to tell us about. So if he did say, how can the world be so cruel that it took away this
Yeah.
puppy, or why would this happen to me when I have a right to, it's just to say, yes, you do. You love that puppy, and it's a terrible thing.
Mhm.
I don't think he'll become a horrible, bitter old man who feels like, he's entitled to happiness at every moment
Yeah.
because somebody said to him, yeah, that's just not fair.
Right.
It's just not fair. That he might be a little bit more inclined to become like that if they say, suck it up, kid, puppies die. But either way, excuse me, I think we're pretty resilient. I think what we need is just to be heard and to feel like our feelings can be expressed
Yeah.
without being judged by us or anybody else. And we can really judge ourselves harshly. I mean, I don't know if he was aware that
Right.
he in some sense killed his puppy, because that is a very
That is
terrible way
kind
to
of
learn
one way
about
to
death,
see it.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very terrible way to learn about death, is to
Right.
cause the death of somebody, right?
Yes.
Like a natural death is, all things considered, not as terrible as an accident or a murder or a
Yeah.
suicide, and a death in which you had no part, in which you did everything you could to be helpful, is not as hard to deal with as one in which maybe I could have done something more. I mean, these are the things that we suffer with, right?
Yeah.
For me, I mean, I think I'm suffering just as much when I'm 56 as when I was 4, with the finality of it.
Yeah.
I just can never wrap my mind around it. And the only thing that gets us, me anyway, past the over and over again, like, oh my God, so and so is dead. So how can they be? How can they still be dead? Is just, it happens over and over again until you get used to it, which is kind of, part of the grief process itself, is you wish you didn't have to get used to it.
Right.
But I'm still stunned to this day, like I'm never going to see them again. They're never going to laugh again. They're never, the things you love about this person are just all in the past now.
Yeah. I went
I don't think, maybe there's a way that people deal with it. For me, it's just like, oh yeah, here we are again.
yeah, belief systems vary. I was in Dallas
Yeah.
recently for the memorial service of my aunt, my mother's sister. And while there, I was making remarks, and I told them the story of when we first lost my first person I ever remember losing was my great grandmother, my grandmother's mother.
Mhm.
And I was sitting inside the chapel at the funeral home, and they were doing various things. Songs were playing, flowers were being delivered, people were talking, and I was just waiting. I remember just sitting there waiting for a moment when I could just escape. I was planning my path. I was going to run out of the room, and I did. I waited until someone was talking and everyone was watching them, and I just took off and ran outside. I somehow, in my young mind, what age was that? 8, 9, remember? I ran out thinking that if I'm not here for this, then she's not gone. So if I
I
were
understand that
home
very well.
now, if I were to go home now to her house, she'll be there. Because I didn't
Yeah.
see this happen. I thought if I could not watch it, what is that, ostrich syndrome? If you can't see me, if I
It is
can't
now.
see
That's a
you.
good name for it.
Yeah. So that's,
No, I really get. I mean, I'm sorry about your aunt.
well, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And sorry to 8 or 9 year old John for the loss of your great grandmother. I think that's really, yeah, I bet that's a very common experience.
I
And
guess.
I've known experience. I have echoes of that in my own self, on that feeling of, if I just don't look,
Yeah.
or if I'm not there, if I go do 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 do, it won't
Yeah.
be real.
Not real.
And honestly, right? I mean, what does everybody say?
Out
I know when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross first talked about
yeah.
her 5 stages, she was talking about our own deaths. She was talking about how do we deal with our impending death,
Right.
the news that we are dying, say. But she willingly accepted that people were applying it to grief as well. Like, oh yeah, that actually happens to us when we learn about the death of somebody. And one of the stages is denial. And of course, they don't really come in order either. And
Right.
it just seems to be one of the ways that human beings deal with the overwhelming,
Yeah.
is we make up fictions to ourselves, like, oh well, if I'm not hearing about this, then I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I think it's our brain's very brilliant evolutionary, call it evolution or grace or whatever, way to deal a little more gradually with that
Yeah.
slamming of the door.
Right.
I mean, because you know it, right? You didn't grow up all your life thinking it didn't happen.
Right.
You eventually integrated the fact that she was gone and all of the things that meant, bit by bit. And
I had known other
I guess
people.
you didn't escape, right? You didn't
I didn't.
actually.
Right. They came. This same aunt. That's why I was telling the story. This same aunt came and
Yeah.
got me. Yeah. Yeah.
Was it her grandmother?
It was her grandmother. Right. Yeah. So that was just one of those things that happened. But I had known other people who had lost folks. I mean, I just had not been to a funeral myself. I'd sat on the porch with this same great grandmother and watched a hearse go by and all the other cars with their lights on. And what is that? So that's a funeral. That's what happens when you die. They put you in the big black car.
What do you think? Do you think that's good for kids to,
Depending
did
on
that
the
help
age.
prepare you in any way for your own losses?
Yeah, I don't know that it did. I remember asking the question. I remember her giving me the response. We were looking through this big screened-in porch. What
Yeah.
happened? I didn't get a chance. I remember not getting a chance to ask more questions because something else happened. But I am a fan, not just relative to grief, but I'm a fan of truth telling.
Mm.
And I know that it always depends on whose truth is being told. But I am a fan of having, for example, Madison ask me a question about something and sort of taking a deep breath, factoring in her age and experiences and my own, and trying to find some language that can bridge that gap. So I'm a fan of that, and I felt
Yeah,
like
me too.
when I look back at it now, I remember my great grandmother trying to tell me something. I just from her countenance, this was important to her. I just want
Hmm.
to know why the lights were on and what the big black car was. That's really all I was asking.
Sure.
I wasn't asking about, what death is or where they're going and what happens after death. I just wanted to, she heard the question differently. And so she gave me this bigger answer. But I'm a fan of trying to tell children the truth. And
Yeah.
I mean the grown children too. I'm a fan of
Yeah.
I'm just trying to,
Yeah.
and it your communication skills may not allow it, their ability to hear may not allow it, but I'm a fan of the effort, be putting forth the effort on both sides, the speaker and the listener, to try and get at something meaningful here. I'm hesitating to say something true, 'cause I think that's just
Yeah.
so relative, but just something meaningful.
Meaningful.
Yeah, something where we both find some meaning in it. And I found meaning in, the fact that my great grandmother had a lot of feeling about this. Her face changed.
Yeah.
It was different than when she watched television. She was watching these cars go by, and it was important to her that I not move. She actually said that. She said that, no, we respectfully just stay, it won't be long. And
I mean, as we're talking, I'm really realizing how much the community of mourners is important,
yeah,
and that she was introducing you. The big questions maybe weren't there, weren't even in
yeah,
your mind yet, and you didn't know this person at all, right? But
right.
you were there on the periphery, and you're seeing, oh, how does an adult respond? And one thing is, well, you stop and wait respectfully
Yeah,
as the hearse goes by, that there is a the body of somebody who was until recently alive in that
yeah,
car, right? And that this is part of the rituals of our community, and just hearing how it affected you to recognize that something important was happening inside her. And I think again, there we're being introduced to, like, there is a community of people who all have to grapple with this.
yeah,
We all come to the understanding that everybody dies. And we all come to our own theological understanding of what that means. Is death permanent or not, and so on. But we all have to deal with this.
yeah,
And it is good to know that you are not alone. So that already, when she died, you already had something, as difficult as that experience was, and
right.
new to have somebody that close to you die. You already had something around you of, like, oh, this is what it is to be human, and
Yeah,
we're going to get through this thing together, you know?
yeah, I think if I had to pull out what I took from her, I just thought death
Yeah.
was really serious. I just
Uh-huh.
as a
Uh-huh.
kid,
Yeah.
it's not something to be played with, because I normally, if we were watching something or doing something, I could do whatever I wanted. But in
Right.
this, I didn't have to stand up and stand at attention, but I had to be still. And she,
She didn't want her great grandson out running out and playing in the yard while the
right,
funeral.
while this funeral
Right.
procession was going by, that mattered to
You
her.
don't need to understand why. You just need to know we're just going to be quiet and respectful for a moment
Yeah,
here. No, that's lovely. I have not even really thought about
and it
that.
is
You
still
don't see so
something.
many, you don't see as many funerals go by as
No, you
you
don't.
did when I was a kid.
But I
Um,
still, there's still a part of me that wants to pull over when I'm driving. And
Absolutely. No, me
I
too.
don't always do it. Sometimes I do, but I kind of want to get out of the way if I see the lights behind me. But if they're coming toward me, it's different. But I have always loved uh, cemeteries and being in them and walking around. I've told you stories. I've told other stories about
Yeah, me too.
the
I
place I
do
used to
too.
go on Saturdays before preaching. It wasn't, I didn't go there and preach the sermon, but I would go there and remind myself of who was there. Didn't know them all, but And then I would go to the pulpit and get up and look out and see these people who were all on their way there. And it felt it felt like what I was doing here in this moment was heavier than I probably need to be trying to carry, because I don't know if they recognize they're going where I was yesterday, and so am I. And so that this other stuff that we're playing around with, politics and such, may not be as relevant. And so that's just me and my cemetery wandering days. I used to love to go those Saturdays.
I did too. And again, I live here in San Francisco where there are literally no cemeteries in the city. And then, but of course there are some up and down the peninsula where I work. But when I was a kid, growing up in New England, they were plentiful, and some really old ones too.
Yeah.
So, there's a sense of this very old grief. And I don't know if I was aware of all this at the time. My friends and I just used to like to go and just sit quietly. We knew to be respectful. We didn't run around and play tag, or, it wasn't a place to make out or anything like that, right? We were respectful. But, but we'd sit there with a little lunch or something like that, and sit and talk and look at the gravestones and say, oh, wow, this person died when they were only 14. That's younger than us, and so on. For me, seeing the very, very old stones, again, it was this sense of the cemeteries they're a churchyard to this day. So you see a grave that still hasn't had the stone put in.
Right.
The funeral was just in the last couple weeks.
Right.
And then you see these granite, they're completely worn off because they're older than the country.
Yeah.
And, that's what it's like in the Northeast. And there was something sad, but also very comforting and beautiful about the fact that people have been crying their tears and burying their dead and coming to this peaceful place to talk to the people they loved for a very long time, and it will be here for us. Which is reminding me of Mexico. When you were talking about funerals going by, I thought, well, a place that happened more than it does here was Mexico, where we've lived with our daughter. Most recently when she was 9, so that's some years ago already, but she's 17 now. But you did see funerals just go by sometimes. And I'm trying to remember. I don't think we were walking, but I definitely have a sense of hush about it. Not, okay, everybody take their hat off and bow their head, kind of level, but definitely that's a funeral. And we just stop for a moment, and we don't, whatever we were chatting about, we don't keep chatting about it. Just a sense of, if nothing else, respect for the mourners, but also, memento mori is going by.
Right.
Which I feel like is what you were doing and you walk into the pulpit knowing that your time is limited, and so is the time of these people you're preaching to, and what are you going to say in the light of that? I keep speaking of Mexico, you can get those little figures and all sorts of things, little skeleton figures, skeleton playing the piano, skeleton playing tennis, just it's humorous, and the whole in Oaxaca in particular where we were living, the Dia de los Muertos, there's this whole very humorous, joyful attitude about death. There's a saying in Mexico that the dead are happy because they have no problems. So it's like we're mourning for ourselves, but not for them. They're having a good party wherever
they're doing fine.
So you have these very humorous little figures and all sorts of things like that, but also they're like, there's a skeleton in there. Inside that tennis player you're watching right now, there's a skull and bones, and that's what they're going to be soon. Nothing but that, just like you. Yeah. And so I bought myself a preacher one, and I keep that on my desk. And just a little reminder, like I glanced over and I'm like, that's where you're going. This preacher who's preaching, she's a skull and bones, and she hasn't been here for long, and she won't be here for much longer. I never completely believe it, understand, because I'm talking about me. Yeah. And I might never believe it, even when I'm breathing my last breath. Yeah. But it's just a reminder to try to get through this thick skull that life is short.
Yeah. I can't remember which one of those many philosophy classes it was, but I remember reading something about or hearing something about whistling past the graveyard. I can't remember if it was
I've heard the expression, but I don't actually
yeah,
really know what it means. Is
yeah,
it like a
it comes from somewhere.
superstitious thing? Don't let the
Yeah.
ghosts get you, or?
Well, maybe it's probably maybe that too, but I think it was a way, at least the way I heard the older people say it. This was later when I had the
Yeah.
philosophy classes, but as a kid, whistling past the graveyard was a way of saying, at least as I heard it, that individuals would not be aware, would walk past a cemetery without recognizing that there's the end of your journey over there. You're
Right.
just whistling past the graveyard. You're not paying attention.
Right. Right.
You're not even aware that the people there used to whistle as well, or they walk the same path you're walking. That's sort of, at least that's how I took it.
Exactly. Well, and so, I mean, see how easily we slide from speaking about grief to speaking about our own deaths. And I think
Right.
they're very, I mean, obviously they're related because the thought that somebody's going to grieve for us, we
Yeah.
hope one day is in our minds, but also, but I think one of the reasons it's hard to deal with grief, I mean, there's so many reasons. Grief is a terrible experience, but one of the reasons is that every death reminds us that we also are going to die.
Right.
Um, I mean, sometimes depending on the death, I think, well, that's a lot easier than the grief. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I know I'm speaking to another parent.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
rather die today than ever have to mourn my daughter.
Yeah.
No contest.
Yeah.
Absolutely no contest.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, that's an element of grief. And then a lot of it is just, I just miss this person. Just
Yeah.
coming up again and again. I guess I wish they were here and they're not.
Mm.
And it's just, I mean, to bring it back to the congregation, being permitted to accompany somebody as they go through that in even the smallest way it's just a huge privilege. It's a gift.
It's a real gift.
And to watch how people do it. And I admire their strength. Just putting one foot in front of another.
Yeah.
I mean, I know probably if I said to any of them, I don't, but if I said to any of them, I'm admiring your strength, they'd say, I don't have any choice. But people do have a choice. They, and they just get up and get out of bed is sometimes all you can do. And I'm amazed. And I get a lot of my faith comes from the fact that people do that again and again.
I am, of course, aware of the time, but I want to, you had, we talked in the pre-recording meeting about having brought something. Is that something you wanted to share with our?
I do.
Please do.
If I may. So I am an amateur artist, and as I said, my spiritual director, something she's really done for me is she identified early on that this is my spiritual practice. And so she's really helped me reconnect with making art.
Okay.
And connect it to this. And so she's always suggesting, if I'm dealing with anything, she says, have you drawn that? Have you done any art about that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes. And so this is a play, this particular art, well, I'll show it to you.
Please.
Is there's two pieces that are related. This was inspired, this little drawing, it's not very big, it's about 1 by 12. Was inspired by a poem by Denise Levertov called Listening to Grief. And she talks about grief as like a stray dog. And I won't get it right or paraphrase it right, but look it up, Listening to Grief. It's and talking about that grief is like this stray dog, and that, the dog just wants to be let in. This is what I mean about just acknowledging our feelings.
Yeah.
And that this thought, like, and she ends with, you want to be my own dog, just to be my own dog, and just to say, yes, this is my grief. And it makes it, for me, that image made the grief something itself to care for and have sympathy for, and not something big and terrifying and overwhelming that was going to eat me alive. Oh, it just wants my attention and to curl up in a space on the floor. and somehow, so I try to think about that. And doing this drawing helped me think about it when a grief is coming to me, and just think, oh, can I just say, well, come on in.
Yeah.
So years later, I did this, and then several years later, when I was dealing with some other loss, because they come along, as I said, I came back to the image. So thank you, Denise Levertov. And here the dog is really just asking at the door, you know.
Yeah.
Can I come in at this moment of, and what am I gonna say?
Yeah.
I
like that a lot.
It really helped me.
Yeah.
I mean, the process of drawing helps me.
Sure.
And the poem helped me. And that idea of listening to our grief helped me. I guess because it speaks to the part of me that feels like I can always learn from anything. I can learn from whatever person, however annoying or, you know, bad or mean or, you know, unintelligent they are, whatever. They always have, there's something I can learn from what they're saying. And I can learn from any experience. And grief is the kind of thing that, like your 8 or 9-year-old self, I just want to run from it.
Yeah.
If I just put the blanket over my head,
right.
If I just don't think about it, if I get busy with something else, then will it go away? And we can make our feelings go underground, but I don't think we can ever really make them go away.
Yeah.
So that reminder to it's just a little stray dog, let it in, you know, it's okay.
Love that, Amy.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share that.
Absolutely. Thank you for.
And I would be a spiritually healthier person if I took Sandy's advice and drew every time I had a grief to process. But thank you, Sandy. But but whatever people do, I think that it's true of all our feelings. I mean, they will out and they will affect us, and they're usually a lot, in my experience, a lot less scary when we let them in for real than we think they're going to be. I'm going to be completely overwhelmed by that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I started in our pre-meeting, I said, I have not suffered the loss of anybody very close to me. My parents, knock wood, are still alive.
Yeah.
I have not lost anybody in my immediate family. I've had my losses, but as I said, my former husband is the person closest to me, the person I really loved and spent time with, and what I had to deal with. Now they are not in the world anymore.
Right.
And even then he wasn't a part of my daily life anymore.
Yeah.
So grief still has some really hard lessons for me.
Yeah.
That I have not had to learn.
Well, Amy, I hope you continue to be a good student. And I will attempt to be a good student as well. But I want to thank you for making the time to speak with me today. And I am going to speak for our audience and say that what has happened here with you for me has been meaningful, and I believe it will be meaningful for them as well. For those of you who happen to be listening to us, if you are dealing with a difficult time and grief is your companion right along through this trail, I hope you'll be encouraged and not give up and keep walking. I want to thank you again, Amy, for making the time to be with us and being our special guest today. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. To those of you watching the podcast, I am John Wright, host of the Grief as a Language podcast. We appreciate you taking the time to listen, taking the time to watch, and we'll talk again soon. Until next time.